This is her first time presenting to this committee, so welcome, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If at any point you can't hear me, just give me a wave. So thank you, Madam Chair, and hello, everyone. My name's Perry. So this is a land use bylaw map amendment application or rezoning application for vacant land facing Middle Dyke Road. The proposed rezoning is to go from the residential 1 or R1 zone to the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone. So the application is to rezone 1.1 acres of the remainder lot parcel F, which fronts Middle Dyke Road, to permit the development of 5 semi-detached dwellings with a total of 10 residential units. This piece of land is owned by Bryson Developments, who has been slowly subdividing the land in the larger Eagles Landing subdivision. This application proposes to rezone the portion of the remainder parcel that faces Middle Dyke Road to allow for semi-detached dwellings to be constructed with driveway access from Middle Dyke Road. So this is the map of the municipality. The red circle indicates the general location of the subject site within the community of North Kentville. So this is an aerial image of parcel F, which is outlined in red. The whole of parcel F is 4.8 acres in area, and the parcel has street frontage to Airy Drive to the north, Middle Dyke Road to the east, and Aquila Court, which is the cul-de-sac which extends into the site from Airy Drive. The area of parcel F proposed to be rezoned is shown in blue and is 1.1 acres in area and has street frontage to Middle Dyke Road and Airy Drive. The area proposed to be rezoned, it has approximately 400 feet of road frontage to Middle Dyke Road. The site is located in an established residential area which is sandwiched between agricultural areas, which can be seen on the left and right hand sides of the image. Middle Dyke Road is also the eastern boundary of the North Kentville Growth Centre. So I will note that this image is slightly outdated in that we do have semi-detached dwellings constructed, to the south of the site in this area here. So this is an image of those semi-detached dwellings which have been constructed or are almost reaching completion at this time. And this is the type of dwelling that is proposed to be constructed in the area that's looking to be rezoned. So this is a closer aerial image of the site, which is currently vacant, and the portion of the land which is proposed to be rezoned from the residential 1 unit R1 zone to the residential 1 and 2 unit R2 zone is outlined in red. So this is a zoning map of the subject site. The site, as I said, is zoned currently for the residential 1 unit R1 zone. The R1 zone allows for the development of 1 unit dwellings and secondary suites as of right under the zone. The R1 zone does not allow for any other dwelling form to be constructed that would allow for 2 residential units in 1 building. The R2 zone does allow for semi-detached dwellings to be constructed as of right, which is why this application is proposed. The site is surrounded by a number of zones, including the R2 zone, which directly abuts the site to the south, the residential mixed density R3 zone, also to the south. We also have the institutional I1 zone to the southeast, and then we have the agricultural zone, A1 zone to the east and west. There is a drainage ditch along the western side of Middle Dyke Road, which is identified as being in the environmentally sensitive area overlay, and this could mean that either the drainage ditch is at risk of flooding or has a slope of greater than 20%. So the site and surrounding land to the west of Middle Dyke Road is located in the residential designation. The land to the east of Middle Dyke Road is located in the agricultural designation. The residential designation identifies what the land can be used for, and if rezoning is proposed, what those changes can be. So the Municipal Planning Strategy Policy 3.1.3 states that all residential zones are permitted within the residential designation, meaning that the Municipal Planning Strategy does not prohibit the rezoning of the land from the R1 zone to the R2 zone if all other policy components are met. So this is a hypothetical map showing what the zoning would look like if this amendment is approved after consideration by Council. So we have the R2 zone continuing up from Scott Drive and wrapping around the eastern edge of the site. So this is an image taken of the site looking up Aquila Court from Airy Drive, and we can see the semi-detached dwellings which have been newly constructed facing Scott Drive in the background. This is a photo taken from Aquila Court looking towards Middle Dyke Road and over the land that will be, or is proposed to be, rezoned. And again, on the right-hand side of the photo, we have the newly constructed semi-detached dwellings facing Scott Drive. This is a photo taken from Airy Drive looking up at Scott Drive with Middle Dyke Road on the left-hand side of the screen. And again, one of the semi-detached dwellings facing Scott Drive can be seen in the background there. And you can also see the drainage ditch on one side of Middle Dyke Road. So, prior to the public information meeting, 80 property owners were within 500 feet of the subject property were notified by letter mail, and a notice was included in the Valley Journal Advertiser on the 20th of February. A public information meeting was held on the 29th of February with 16 members of the public in attendance. A recording of the public information meeting has been made available through the municipal website since that time. Out of the public information meeting, a number of concerns were raised in regards to the development that would be enabled through this rezoning. I would like to note that the application has been amended since the public information meeting. The original proposal that was presented at the public information meeting was for the development of 10 semi-detached dwellings with a total of 20 residential units. That number has now been halved, and what we're presenting today is the total of 5 semi-detached dwellings with 10 residential units. So the concerns that were raised are somewhat interconnected, but they generally related to the density of dwellings and neighbourhood character. So under the current R1 zoning, 2 residential units are permitted per 4,000 square feet by way of a 1-unit dwelling with a secondary suite. Under the proposed R2 zoning, 2 residential units are permitted per 4,000 square feet. So the R2 zone only provides for more built form types than what's available in the R1 zone. The R1 zone, there's no setback changes between the R1 zone and the R2 zone, so they're effectively the same beyond allowing different built form types. In respect to neighbourhood character, the MPS does not consider neighbourhood character in a large way, in that it's not static and it evolves over time. In respect to road safety and traffic generation, the Provincial Department of Public Works is the responsible authority for Middle Dyke Road. This application was referred to them for comment, and they've not raised any concern in respect to the proposed development enabled through this application. In respect to sidewalks, the Middle Dyke Road frontage is identified by the municipality on the sidewalk priority map as an area of priority without sidewalks. Staff do not know of any plans at this time to construct a sidewalk along Middle Dyke Road, but it has been identified as an area of priority for the future. The municipality has a street lighting bylaw, which is bylaw 45, and that outlines how street lighting can be applied for and what options are available for current and future residents. So that is something that the residents can undertake themselves moving forwards. In respect to stormwater, this will be considered at a later stage, in that if this application is consented to by council, through the subdivision process, the stormwater management is effectively looked at and will be considered at that point in time. In respect to restrictive covenants, that's a civil matter that sits outside of the scope of the land use bylaw map amendment process, so isn't something we can consider at this time. So in respect to the policy which enables this application, Municipal Planning Strategy Policy 5.3.3 states that council shall consider amendments to the zoning maps of the land use bylaw provided the application is for a specific development and is to rezone land to another enabled within the same designation. So as stated before, both the R1 and R2 zone fall under the residential designation, and this application has the intent of this rezoning is to develop 5 semi-detached dwellings. So Municipal Planning Strategy Policy 5.3.5 states that council shall consider in relation to all applications to rezone land, point A, the applicable zone placement policies, Point B, the impact of both the specific development proposal and of other possible uses permitted in the proposed zone. And point C, the general criteria set out in section 5.3 of the municipal planning strategy. So in respect to point A of MPS policy 5.3.5, the subject site is currently designated for residential use. Both the current zone R1 and the proposed zone R2 fall under the residential designation. As such, the proposed rezoning will maintain the intent of the residential designation in line with the MPS. The subject site, and more specifically the portion of the site proposed to be rezoned, has frontage to Middle Dyke Road, which is on the periphery of the North Kentville Growth Centre. The area proposed to be rezoned provides an opportunity for infill development in an existing residential area where existing services can be utilised and 2-unit dwellings are already permitted by way of a 1-unit dwelling with a secondary suite. Given the site directly abuts lands in the R2 zone and in proximity to other residential zones which permit greater numbers of units on the land, it's staff opinion that the proposal meets the general zone placement policy. In respect to point B of policy 5.3.5, the proposed rezoning does not increase the range of permitted non-residential uses allowed on the land. The R2 zone permits group dwellings and different dwelling form typologies in comparison to the R1 zone. This application proposes the development of semi-detached dwellings, which are not permitted in the R1 zone but are permitted in the R2 zone. This proposal does not seek to increase the density of residential units or dwellings on the land, simply to permit a different proposed building form than what's permitted in the current zone. In respect to Part C of Policy 5.3.5, we need to consider the general criteria. Some of the criteria considered in this area are not under the jurisdiction of the County of Kings, so we have referred the application out for comments from those bodies. So the proposal is not expected to have an increased financial impact on the municipality, and typically we see this through things like the creation of infrastructure under areas where we have the jurisdiction. In regard to land use compatibility, staff are of the opinion that as this is an existing boundary between residential and agricultural uses, the land use compatibility will be maintained in its current state. The site is in proximity to a range of schools, training facilities and amenities and parks. Staff did consult with the Department of Public Works in regards to traffic hazards and the adequacy of the road network, and they expressed no concerns. Similarly, with fire protection services and equipment, we did consult with the local deputy fire chief and no concerns were indicated. The town of Kentville was consulted in regards to water services and no concerns were raised. The stormwater management plan will need to be submitted for consideration at the time of subdivision of the land, and the Department of Works will also consider sizing of a new culvert in the drainage ditch when access permits are applied for. Staff consider the site suitable for the proposal based on its grade. So this is where we're at in terms of the amendment process. A public information meeting was held on the 29th of February 2024 in council chambers. Right now we're at the Planning Advisory Committee stage, and should this application go through to a public hearing, notification letters will be sent out to the properties within 500 feet of the subject site, and the public hearing will be advertised in the local newspaper as well. So staff are recommending that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that the Municipal Council give first reading to and hold a public hearing regarding the application to rezone a portion of Parcel F, North Kentville, PID 55496-038 from the residential 1-unit R1 zone to the residential 1 and 2-unit R2 zone. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee reference this application? Councillor Granger.
I just wanted to understand why they went to a smaller package. So they initially had one thing and then went to another.
Oops.
So, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Granger. So I believe it was potentially miscommunication of the developer to start with, but also after comments from the public. Were a little confused as to how they could fit so many dwellings based on the land area, and so I believe the developer has taken that feedback on board and has decided to amend their application.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Davison.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Did our engineers go in and have a look at that, where that road curves off if you're coming south towards Duminus? There's quite a turn on that, right there on that where that land is proposed. Did they have a look at that, where their driveways were going to be right there, or where there's going to be a blind crest on that corner?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Davison. So the application was referred to the Department of Public Works in respect to that road, as it's their jurisdiction. In respect to the blind crest, they didn't speak to that specifically, but they did advise that in future access permits will be needed for all driveways accessing Middle Dyke Road, and they would have specific standards that are needing to be met at that time in respect to the curve and such.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? I do have one, if the committee will allow. It's just in reference to, you said about streetlights. And I know that we do have a policy here about installation of streetlights and charging them back to the property owners. And that's my question. Are these going to be rentals?
It's not clear at this time, based on my understanding from the developer in terms of wanting to subdivide the land. I would assume that would mean his intention is to sell the lots to individual new parties, but I can't speak to whether they would be rentals.
Yeah, my question was just basically if they are rental properties, would it be the owner that would be responsible for the cost of the streetlights if they were put in?
Yes.
Or would it be the renters?
It would be the owners.
Yeah, okay, thank you. If there's no further questions of clarification, Ms. Baumann has read the recommendation into the record. And so if I could have a mover. Councillor Killen, Councillor Granger, thank you. Is there any debate? You guys are making this fast. Okay, you can register your vote now. And that is approved unanimously. Thank you, unanimously. Did I say that right? So our second item today is amendments to the municipal planning strategy to designate portions of Greenwich to the growth center. And that file belongs to Ms. Mosier. Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. We are here this afternoon to examine some options related to redesignating Greenwich as a growth center. So this presentation is going to be a little bit different than what we normally see at this committee, in that we're not making a recommendation in terms of specific amendments. Those haven't been drafted. This is simply to present potential options for staff to pursue in terms of potentially designating Greenwich as a growth center. But the full approval would come at a later date. This is really the kickoff to this planning project. So staff have prepared this report and presentation in response to two requests from two different property owners within the community of Greenwich. The first is Mr. Terry Henniger, the owner of 377 Sunnyside Road. So we see on the screen an aerial photo of the property. It has frontage on Sunnyside Road. It says Highway 1 here, but it turns down onto a separate road called Sunnyside Road, as well as frontage on Birch Drive and Sunnyside Road in the south. The property is roughly 4 acres, and the proposal from the owner is to develop two 25-unit multi-unit dwellings. This property does have some constraints in terms of there are several water courses in the area, and there is a fairly significant ravine that runs through it, so that would be the rationale for a somewhat limited proposal on the 4-acre property. The second request comes from Get Real Properties. They are the current owner of 9701 and 9693 Commercial Street. This property is bisected, is half within the growth center of New Minas and half within the community of Greenwich. This forms the remainder parcel of the old Horton High site. You may recall there was a high school here. I don't exactly know when it was demolished. I'm sure Ms. Javra could provide that history if desired. Since that time, we have seen two developments go in by development agreement. The first I'll describe is Fairbanks Avenue. This is developed with a series of townhouses, and at the rear there is permission for a multi-unit dwelling, which is currently under construction as an 18-unit multi-unit dwelling. The western portion was previously developed as well. This is currently developed with a 40-unit apartment building. And the property itself, the remainder, is 6.55 acres in size. And the current development agreement on the property emphasizes commercial uses to be developed with limited residential uses. And at this time, due to market conditions, that type of development is no longer economically feasible on this parcel. And so the current owners have proposed a mixed-use development with commercial uses at grade along the frontage of Highway 1, but with significantly increased residential units, totaling approximately 283 units is the proposal. But again, the requests are not what we're looking at today. We're simply looking at, these are what prompted this report and presentation, but staff have developed several options that could be used to move forward to enable the requested developments on these properties. So this is the community of Greenwich. We see here, this orange line here denotes the boundary of the growth center of New Minas. On the east side at Elderkin Drive, this is the approximate boundary of the town of Wolfville. And Greenwich is bounded to the north by the Cornwallis River and the south by Highway 101. The area is predominantly agricultural in nature, as you can see from the aerial photos, with significant areas under agricultural production at this time. However, as it was a former hamlet under our previous planning documents, Greenwich has seen some degree of development over time, at least since 1979 when the first planning documents came into play. But these were developed under a hamlet designation. So we see a pocket of development here on Eden Row. The frontage along Highway 1 is fairly well developed between Eden Row and the Greenwich Connector, and similarly along the frontage between the Greenwich Connector and the boundary of New Minas. But in the southwest portion, we've seen additional significant for a rural area development in terms of primarily residential uses, but there are a couple of multi-units in here, as well as 1 and 2 unit dwellings. And I've just thrown 2 stars up on that image to show the properties that made the request. So both of them are relatively close together, and they are both located within the primarily developed area of Greenwich in the southwest portion. This is a zoomed in aerial photograph just to denote the level of development in this portion of Greenwich in the south side of Highway 1 and the west side of the Greenwich Connector. We see Kimbrough Court, Birch Drive. These are fully developed at this time. The frontage of Deep Hollow Road, as well as Highway 1 and Sunnyside Road, have been developed. We discussed Fairbanks. Within this sort of corner of Sunnyside Road and Highway 1, we have seen some additional multi-unit development occur in recent years. Down here we have a Shannex, so a long-term care home has been developed at the end of Jessica's Way, which has also been fully developed. Similarly, Avon Lane and Greenwich Road have also been fully developed for quite some time. And here are our subject properties again. So when we're considering an amendment to the municipal planning strategy, it's probably best practice to stay within the general planning framework that's been established in the municipal planning strategy. And by way of reminder, our municipal planning strategy emphasizes two main goals that often seem at odds with each other, but in fact serve to reinforce each other. And the first is the protection of agricultural land, and the second is efficient, compact urban development. And while they might seem at odds, they do serve to reinforce each other. Residential demand often tends to prompt the removal of agricultural land out of production and into development. And so having more compact development manages that demand while retaining agricultural lands for much, much longer. And our planning policies do identify the main characteristics of a growth center. Primarily, these are outlined in policy 2.1.3 and include central water and sewer service, active transportation corridors, community and recreation facilities, education facilities, diverse housing options, as well as a concentration of commercial and/or industrial opportunities. It's important to note that not all of our growth centers contain all of these characteristics. For active transportation corridors in the form of sidewalks along Highway 1, as well as the Harvest Moon Trail to the north. There are community and recreation facilities in the form of the Greenwich Community Hall, as well as the Bishop Hall provides community and recreation services. Education facilities, actually I'm not sure there's a school, but Horton High is on the other side of Highway 101. There are diverse housing options. As I mentioned, there are 1 and 2 unit dwellings primarily, but also several multi-unit dwellings as well. We do see a concentration of commercial and/or industrial opportunities at the intersection of the Greenwich Connector and Highway 1. This is where you'll find the Irving gas station along with a convenience store, a veterinarian's office, a nursery, a plant nursery, as well as several other commercial uses. When council is seeking to apply growth center boundaries, whether new or expanded, it's meant to consider the following criteria. So our municipal planning strategy identifies several growth clusters. And this one is in a cluster with the towns of Kentville, Wolfville, New Minas, and Port Williams. And we're meant to ensure that there's an adequate supply of vacant or underused land within the cluster, but not necessarily within an individual growth center. There is certainly an adequate supply of vacant land within this cluster, especially considering the recently expanded New Minas growth center. However, there are several constraints to immediate development of New Minas South in terms of development agreements, servicing agreements, road construction, and other matters that could take a significant amount of time. However, Greenwich, as we've just reviewed, has all of the conditions for increased development immediately. We're meant to also minimize the loss of agricultural land, and that has been a critical factor in identifying our options today. We're meant to encourage cost-effective servicing. This tends to occur through compact development. We're meant to consider historic development patterns, which we've reviewed. So primarily the development within Greenwich has been along Highway 1 and within the southwest portion of the community. We're meant to discourage strip development, which unfortunately Greenwich has seen a significant amount of strip development along Highway 1, so any option should consider how to discourage that in the future. And we're also meant to consider aligning with natural, geographic, or political or administrative boundaries. So one thing that staff looked at with this was in terms of the boundaries. The village of New Minas is to the west. There are some firm boundaries in the Cornwallis River to the north and Highway 101 to the south, and again the Wolfville town boundary to the east. So these are very strong boundaries. But this specific criteria has not been a critical one in our analysis, simply because that is a significant area. It does form one of our options. However, it does present several downsides, and so staff in a full disclosure statement have indicated that this is not one of the more important criteria in considering for our options. And finally, policy 2.1.13 applies to growth center boundary expansions, not necessarily to the creation of new growth centers. However, given the agricultural nature of Greenwich, staff have also included this in our review. And the MPS identifies growth center expansion areas. There are two. The first is Cambridge North, which is currently under consideration as part of another project that staff are undertaking in conjunction with the new interchange on Highway 101. And the second is North Alton, which is just south of Kentville. However, in reviewing the criteria for growth centers, North Alton has far fewer criteria than Greenwich, and therefore Greenwich is considered a much better candidate in staff's opinion. Any major expansions of growth centers onto agricultural or A1 land are meant to be accompanied by an agricultural impact assessment that assesses the overall loss of the value of the agricultural community, as well as the specific land parcels that may be lost to development. So we have considered these as well. So staff have developed 4 options. The first would be all of the lands between New Minas and the town of Wolfville. The second option is the former hamlet boundary, and I'll discuss that in a moment. The third is a modified hamlet boundary, and the fourth is a do-nothing option. So in planning, we always include a do-nothing option, and this just maintains the status quo. This is an aerial photograph of all of the lands between New Minas and the town of Wolfville. As you can see, there are significant areas of agricultural land that are included within this boundary. This area includes a total of 991 acres, of which 570 are located within the agricultural or A1 zone, and 372 are in active production as of 2012. So you can see this is a zoning map, so you can see the significant areas of A1 land that would be included and that are currently under production. So this option is characterized by the greatest loss of agricultural land, the greatest opportunity for strip development, which is something we're trying to avoid, and the greatest opportunities for inefficient development patterns, where this is bringing a significant amount of land into development with servicing all along Highway 1. Development could occur in a fairly piecemeal or ad hoc fashion, which could result in significant inefficiencies. And there would be the greatest expansion of infrastructure, especially road infrastructure with this option, as well as water and sewer. Our second option is the former hamlet boundary. So under our previous set of planning documents, small rural communities were identified as hamlets and had their own zoning. This was often applied to crossroads in rural areas, so you'll see pockets of what's now A2 land at our rural crossroads, but Greenwich was also one of our more significant hamlets, and all of the current development in this area occurred under those hamlet designation and zoning. So this option includes a total of 464 acres. 92 of those acres are in the A1 zone, of which 62 are in active production in 2012. This option minimizes or reduces the amount of A1 land lost to development, and also reduces the opportunity for strip development and the expansion of infrastructure. Option 3 is a modified hamlet boundary, so you'll notice that, and we'll go back to this for a second, you'll notice that these lands have been removed in option 3. These lands here have been removed, as well as this field here. This option has a total of 313 acres, so roughly 150 acres less than the previous option. 26 of those acres are in the A1 zone. So this option really minimizes the amount of A1 lands lost, and only 15 acres are identified as being in active production. So this option minimizes the loss of agricultural land, most matches the historic development patterns of the area. This really does really shrink wrap the areas that have already been developed. So it doesn't bring a whole lot of new land into development, but it does enable the intensification and infill of the existing area and the existing serviced area. So it also reduces the amount of infrastructure that will need to be extended in order to service future development. And option 4 is our do nothing option. So this is the status quo. This is how things have been occurring today. So all of our agricultural land would continue to be preserved. However, there would be a significant loss of opportunity to intensify an area that already has servicing and existing development patterns. And this wouldn't be a way to stop development in Greenwich. It could still occur, but would happen primarily through development agreement and only at rural densities. So in terms of our next steps, staff, following a recommendation to council would select potentially an option, and staff would then develop an engagement plan to engage with the community to determine the best way forward and what their community would like to see in terms of development. Staff would then proceed with our typical review and prepare the amendments, and then we would follow our normal approval process for municipal planning strategy amendments, which would include a public participation meeting in addition to our public hearing. And that would come back to you in advance of the public participation meeting. So in terms of your alternatives this afternoon, you are more than welcome to recommend one of the 4 options to staff to proceed, well, recommend it to council, and then council hopefully would endorse that recommendation. Or you could refer it back to staff and we could take a look at some additional options if deemed necessary. But at this time, staff are comfortable making the recommendation for option 3, our modified hamlet boundary. And I'll read the recommendation into the record, and it says that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council authorize the Chief Administrative Officer to proceed with amendments to the municipal planning documents to redesignate a portion of the community of Greenwich as a growth center, as described in option 3 of the report dated April 9th, 2024. And I'll pass it back to the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Mosier. I'm sure there's questions of clarification. Oh yes, we're lighting up now. Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Laura. My first question is, for example, in option 2, what would be the purpose of including any A1 zoned land in the growth center? I'm just wondering, what development potential would it even have?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Morse. Well, it's unlikely that it would retain its A1 zoning through
Okay.
this process. The A1 zone is not enabled within growth centers, so we would be looking at rezoning all of the lands in any of the options. I should note, however, that any land that is being farmed can continue to be farmed regardless of its zone. It's an existing use and can continue in perpetuity. There would be nothing forcing the property owners to cease farming.
Understood. I do have one further question. In option 3, I noted that the Dexter Quarry was removed. Was there a reason for that?
No, not really any particular reason. It's currently under rural industrial zoning, and staff didn't necessarily see the need to alter that.
Okay. I think that's everything for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can light up again if you want to. Councillor Granger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Greenwich is a hamlet. Does it have its own commission or anything like that?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Granger, it's not considered a hamlet any longer. That was a designation under our previous set of planning documents. So all of our former hamlets were given rural zoning under this set of planning documents.
Okay, and if I may, I have a second question.
Yes, go ahead.
So the growth center will be in the village of New Minas then? It'll be
No, the
considered-
village of New Minas ends at that orange line.
Okay,
So there's no village in this area.
okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to Laura. Option 3, where all that A1 land would become possible to sell for development instead of farming, is that correct? You could sell it off for building lots?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Allen, there are 2 pockets of A1 land in option 3, but yes, they would get urban zoning and could be developed as in accordance with whichever zoning was applied.
Because I believe they're basically owned by the same farmer.
That's my understanding, yes.
Yes. It's hard to continue farming when you can sell the land for about 10 times the value of farmland or more.
And that's why staff have developed this option to really minimize the amount of A1 land to ensure that it does stay in production if possible.
Because I know from the past that this farmer we're talking about has mentioned it's becoming more difficult to farm because subdivisions are getting close to his orchards and it's difficult to spray the orchards. That's what I heard. So
This particular orchard has had development around it for several decades. I can't speak to the difficulty of farming it, but I would just note that especially along Greenwich Road, those houses are of a significant age.
my understanding is that they're concerned about the chemicals being sprayed when children are outdoors. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Killam.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question regarding where the province or the provincial approval would work with this. Does it require provincial approval for what we decide on?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Killam, as it is a municipal planning strategy amendment, the approval ultimately would fall to the province through the provincial director of planning and also very likely the minister of municipal affairs and housing.
I just recall the Elderkin application years ago, and that the council had passed it for a portion of that land that's sort of south of the Henniger's farm markets. And we passed it as a council, however, the province overturned it, and I was hoping that it's in line so we don't run into a provincial roadblock for whatever we decide.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Killam, that would very likely be my number 1 reason why we would not recommend option 1.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Friars?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff. So the potential change to either option 2 or 3 obviously would lead to potential development, which currently isn't under consideration in the current plan. My question is related to sort of long-term water sewer services and the type of calculations that have been done to date with the existing plan. Do you take into consideration these kinds of changes? And I know you've indicated there's probably sufficient services now, but I just want to know that we wouldn't be getting into difficulty further down the road if there was, large developments coming in for potential uses of the now, I guess, concentrated land options. So.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Friars, that would be something we'd be looking at in greater detail as part of this proposal. This is, as I mentioned, the very first step, so part of our plan to develop an engagement strategy and a way forward for this would be to, in part, identify what additional studies might be necessary, especially from a servicing perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davison.
Through you, Madam Chair. The last few days I have been receiving emails from residents in the Greenwich area about development and about growth centers. I really, if I'm gonna, pick one as the councillor of that area, option C is definitely the one I would be sort of supporting. There is potential development for housing. I know that when I first started I had a meeting with Trish and Scott, and I knew nothing about the growth centers really. But now that I've been reading and I've learned a lot more about it, I would certainly like to see staff, if I can pass it through council, to look at option C, because we have a potential development that now there could be some commercial and now a lot of residential, which we need. So I think my recommendation would be C, and just to start the ball rolling, and with the residents that have already messaged me and are sort of in support of this right now, I think it's something we should certainly be looking at sooner than later and not delaying too much with it. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? I have a couple. So if these two requests could go forward under a development agreement in just our regular process without ever having to even look at expansion or development of a growth center, am I correct? Oh, did you turn your light on?
I
Sorry.
didn't think I did. Through you to you, no, as proposed, they could not proceed. Within this area, in the A4 zone only, we have one development agreement option that permits what's called clustered development. So that would be residential uses within low-rise structures. Could be 1 unit, 2 units, or even a small apartment building. But it would be limited to 8 units on the lot, and a minimum lot size of 80,000 square feet would be required to accommodate those 8 units, which is very low density compared to our urban zones, with our R1 zone permitting up to 30 units per acre. This would be a significant reduction in development on sewer service land than could be achieved through urban zoning.
Okay. And if we make this recommendation to council, will you also be bringing forward, are you going to bring it forward as this presentation? Or are we only going to give council this option 3? Or do we offer them the other options as well? This would come forward with our recommendation.
Right.
But there are other options which I think should be put to council.
It
So
would
no?
it would be my intent to present this presentation to council.
As a whole?
Yes.
Okay. So,
And the
so
the report would move forward as well with all 4 options outlined.
right, okay. All right, that's the end of my questions. Is there anything further as far as clarification goes? So do I have a move, do you want to put the motion back up? Ms. Mosier has read this into the record. I'll read it again. That the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council authorize the Chief Administrative Officer to proceed with amendments to the municipal planning documents to redesignate a portion of the community of Greenwich as a growth center as described in option 3 of the report dated April 9, 2024. Do I have a mover? Councillor Davison? Councillor Killam, thank you. Is there any debate? I think we sort of got into the debate part of it a bit and clarification, but is there anybody else that would like to? Go ahead, Councillor Killam.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be clear that this option 3 does allow the proposed development for the Horton property.
I
Is that
believe that's
correct?
what Ms. Mosier said, yes. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I turned it off because we were in debate. Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Killam. We can't guarantee that the proposal as proposed would move forward. We do need to do the studies required to apply the urban zoning, but it would certainly result in significantly more options than are currently available on that property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything further? If not, I'll call the question and you can register your votes now. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Something else for council to chew over. Is there any other business to be brought forward The date of our next meeting is May 14th, 2024. Hard to believe it's going to be May, at 1 o'clock. Comments from the public? Nothing? Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Allen, Councillor Davison, thank you. And you can register your vote on that matter now. We are adjourned. Thank you.